Quand il arrive, bon alors les interprètes ils vont sur scène, je dis non attendez là, bougez pas.
C'est pas ça du tout.
Ouais, non, il faut que je t'explique un truc là. Ici c'est moi qui gère le spectacle.
Sur comment réconcilier urbains et ruraux.
Urban and rural, so the opposition between the new city and the countryside, not new, opposition educated individuals access to public services, and the other side, you know, less active people with a lower education level. So the question we ask ourselves today, well, to assess the scope of this reality, that is, is this opposition still valid today? Is it still valid in France and in other countries of the world? We're very fortunate to have guests from other countries than France, from foreign countries, and you will hear them. And therefore, you have to want to know if the recent evolution with telework has modified this notion, opposition between rural and urban. So this is the first question we ask ourselves. Second is that how can we reconcile those two domains or populations, what public policies are expected or to be expected, which are efficient, which function, and if they function, how do they do it? So I will frame the discussion, what the economists say about those elements today in less than 2 minutes. And then the first point I would like to insist on is that this opposition is complicated to implement, to evidence in data, for the simple reason that in the INSEE, the Statistic French Survey Institute, will talk about urban, peri-urban, suburbs, center of town centers. So there's a continuum in the invitation, in the ways or in the modes of life, and what's complicated even statistically to establish tight borders. That's the first point. It's nevertheless, we know that one asset active out of 3 or slightly less than works outside of urban zones, and 80% of the population covers 80% of the territory. So it's a reality of the separation. Now, if we want to separate the two populations, well, there are inequalities. First, access to jobs. There are less than 60 jobs for 100 active in rural areas, which is not the case in urban zones, and therefore more than 1 person in rural area out of 2 works in urban zones. So there are inequalities in terms of healthcare, life expectancy in the rural area in 2 weeks shorter than in urban zone for similar age, gender, and job. And of course, inequalities in access to public services has been widely documented during the yellow vest crisis, access to healthcare, schools. We know that 100% of urban people find emergency service in hospital in 20 minutes, which is not the case in rural areas. Now, I'd like us to insist on the exchange between the two populations. Are there interactions? They're even more important than we are in the ecological transition. And of course, there are flows of energy, material, goods, and services between the two segments of the population, which make them very complementary. And the last point will be on public policies of resorption of inequalities and even the stakes in terms of vote. You know, the vote in rural areas and the explanation of the yellow jackets. You know, with that yellow vest. Sorry, we know that one of the elements for the disgrace was to live in medium-sized cities. You know, you depend on public transport, on the price of fuel, and to feel remote from the center of town. There are recent work have been done by Claudia Seni, who's with us today, which shows more specifically that the political crisis, the vote for extreme parties, can be explained by the fact that the people belong to a city on a peri-urban zone, which has been declassified, which has lost a public service level of employment, or it's been an increase in unemployment. So clearly, it is the way that you belong to a community or to municipality which is impacted by the lack of facilities. With no further ado, I'll give the floor to the experts. Thank you, Maya Bakash, for this introduction. A couple of notes and regrets before moving to the debate. It's a great trip or from the mountains of Guangxi, Oslo, Dubai, or the island of Zond, or the rural territories of France. So first, it will be an accelerated trip because of the time available, and which also resembles the thematic challenges we face today. Third, just one figure to share with you. Pierre Jacquet, who is chief economist at in the French Development Agency, said that in fact, in 2012, 5 million rural inhabitants would leave the countryside every month in the world. Now, maybe one regret that there is no room in this roundtable for agriculture. We can play a major role in this reconciliation between urban territories and rural territories. Thank you. Straight away, let's turn to Isabelle Arlberg. You come from Oslo, you run a architect practice, present all over the world. Now, from the architecture and urban planning, can we reconcile urban and rural? And how do you innovate in this domain?
Excuse me for not speaking your beautiful language, but I will have to speak in English. So yes, I come from Snøhetta. We are a global architecture firm. And we've worked for the past 35 years. We've built our foundation on the Brundtland Commission's UN report, Our Common Future. So our philosophy is very much aligned with the 3 pillars of sustainability, which is economic, social, and environmental sustainability. With that in mind, I would say that Snøhetta very much designs within 4 axes when we think about urban and rural development. And those 4 axes are contextual and sustainable design. And the final one is mixed-use development and smarter growth. And so if I start off with sustainable and contextual design, we believe that as architects, we have a large responsibility for building our environment for the future. We believe that we need to design with generosity in mind, with building more openness for dialogue. And we believe that by giving back to society more than just a building, we believe that we can open up communities. And I think that's what's important for us, is that we all need to talk more, because it's all about the people. So a couple of examples. Here in France, for example, we've built the Le Monde headquarters in Paris. And if any of you have been there, you see the generosity that us and the client have given back to the public with the beautiful arc under the building, where the public can pass through to the metro station that is soon to come, but also just be able to play and have recreation there. So important that we can both work and play in the same place and open up for the public while it is a commercial building. Another example of work that we've done is Times Square and the rehabilitation. So previously in New York, Times Square was one of the busiest thoroughfares for traffic, and by making that a pedestrian area, we've actually been able to increase pedestrian safety. We've been able to increase actually revenues in the stores surrounding, and we've been able to reduce crime. Now, I can just say these things to you, and you can believe them or not, but we actually do post documentation on all these projects that we do, so we actually have finite numbers on our ability to improve societies and communities where we build. The third one, and this is a bit of a push for you all to come to Oslo, is to come and visit the National Opera and Ballet. And if any of you have been to an opera house, they're usually very traditional, usually very closed, usually very, more for high society. But when we built the opera, we really wanted to include the community in owning the opera. And so we built an opera where the public could actually own the roof. And this roof has become the largest tourist destination in Oslo now, where people walk up and down the marble roof, which is actually categorized as a piece of art, which is why you can walk on it. And more people actually visit the opera this way than they did previously. So those are just a couple of examples on how we can build and include communities in our designs. If I have 1 more minute left. One more minute left. I just want to talk about mixed use and smart growth. So with regards to mixed use, I think that's probably the route forward to incorporate urban and rural design, is that we need to build for the best of these two communities. We need to build that tight community feeling in rural development, so build mixed use where we can also, work. So build housing, commercial, and recreational facilities in one go, so that we don't get this urban sprawl. And in the cities, I love the Paris thinking or strategy about the 15-minute city, where you want to kind of incorporate the community feeling from rural into these mega cities, where you can get all you need, if it's housing, if it's commercial, if it's recreational, if it's education, if it's healthcare, all within 15 minutes. So those are also a couple of projects that we're working on.
Merci.
Thank you for concluding on the 15-minute city. Marie-Roche Debon, you're president of Keolis, 68,000 employees in the world. This notion of mobility, we saw it with the yellow vest crisis. Can we link up urban territory and rural territory? So how do you innovate in the world? Thank you, Patrice. Well, Keolis is present in rural area and urban areas. Of course, we run metro lines, streetcars, but buses, and we also, because this is the major issue, we try to provide access to all for public transport. We said the right of the right, mobility. This mobility gives you the right to go to everything else, culture, healthcare, school, education, work. So, of course, as a public transport operator in France and in about 12 other countries, the objective is to give access to all, and concretely speak, to be concrete, to be very pragmatic, actually, in the rural environment. Well, there are new solutions, brand new solutions, which have been developed. We won't do a metro like the Grand Paris Express in the middle of bloody nowhere, but, we have other means. We have first the express buses with dedicated lanes. This is, of course, easier than, lighter than railways. It is one means to connect rapidly with priority lane, the pull-up lanes, comfortable vehicles, buses, and we provide access to, citizens have access to locations or trips they could not do without a car. If they don't have a car, another concrete experience, you all know the, transport on request, non-taxi, but they are public operators. If you live in Aix, for example, we do have request transport on demand. You connect yourself to the application with digital. You ask for the vehicle, and the zones which are served, and of course, these are zones which are more peripheral. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're 16 and you come out of the nightclub. You don't have a vehicle and you're a bit drunk. You call Uber, sort of, or even public transport financed by local authority. And we, transport on request. Public transport on request is on demand, is there to ensure time spans very late in the evening. We call it transports. We've transported something like 2.5 million passengers on demand transport. We do ex-periphery. We do center of town, the buses in town, but we also do transport on demand in the periphery, and we transport people with reduced mobility on demand, and we do Strasbourg, Quimper, Orléans, several small cities in France. So ability to complete collective public transport with more flexible, simple systems. So, and if we are more futuristic, we run also autonomous vehicles when they will be they're not fully mature, but straight away, for the last few kilometers especially, when you get to the TGV train station in Le Creusot in the center of France, which is 15 minutes from the city center. Well, how do you get to the city center? Well, the autonomous vehicles for this kind of short runs will be within the scope of the tools and concrete instruments. So the public transport operators with their clients, of course, who the local authorities, which are clients, well, will provide, which provide public transport, pay more and more attention to services to zones with low population density, so that to make sure that public transport is a right for all, and for us, Keolis, it is a priority. Access to all, and in a culture of energy transition, which we want to expand in a very strong way. Well, if people are to stop using their cars, well, they must enjoy public transport. We have to replace the individual cars. So now, in order to facilitate this energy transition, well, public transport to organize themselves to provide alternatives. These are a couple of concrete examples to illustrate the right of the rights. Thank you for having been very concrete with these few examples. No, we could be at the service of public policies when it comes to transport. Now, let's go to China with Zilong. So you've just published a beautiful book called Traffic Destiny. You tell the story of a family in the countryside in China. Maybe couple of minutes to tell us the origin of this book and the message of that book, which is also a very melancholic book as well. Good afternoon, good morning. How is it possible to reconcile cities and countries? Well, this is a topic, a global topic. We don't find answers now. Sometimes we can ask the question to ChatGPT to say how to solve the problem, and when we ask questions to computers today, the question of solving problems is more important than asking questions. Today, young people in Chinese countryside, in the rural areas, when they are not accepted at university, they will go and seek jobs, and sometimes they face women, they marry, they found their families, they have children. Many of these young people want to become urban citizens. Many get worried about the problems of education for their children. And this is why often those children are actually offered to richer families who have problems of fertility. And often poor families, young poor families, will see their children grow in other families. And sometimes there are families where there are problems of adultery, and biological parents will oppose this kind of situation. So children actually come back in their families or origin. So it's complicated. This is why biological fathers often choose to disappear, actually, because their children want to remain in the sort of a more affluent families. Often, the children want to have another fate. They would rather be born in town, and many young people go back to cities to find jobs. So, children who were offered to the rich families, then do investigation. They realize that their real parents, they want to stay as young urban who were born in affluent family, but they want to keep links with their original families. And some children decide to hide the reality, actually. This means that through this type of novel, I tell the world that a lot of rural people would love to go to town, would love to live in town, but and often it's very difficult. And through this novel, we are also reminding the story. The Chinese government has several solutions to this problem. I'll come back to this in a minute. Now, Marianne Lenny, you're president of the Enibis Directory, 100% affiliate. So yeah, we talked about this system of decentralized energy. So why is decentralization of this electrical power system will make it possible to reconcile urban and rural? And what role do you play to recreate activities and your responsibility as a public utility? Thank you, Patrick. Good morning. Yes. So your question raises the issue of ecological transition between urban territories and rural territories. Well, first, let's say that, of course, cities are concerned, but the rural territories are concerned as well because of drought, of water scarcity, or hydric stress, floods, and so on and so forth. And, well, we don't know, but France is the second rural country in Europe behind Poland, with 30% of the population living in rural areas, in municipalities of less than 2,000 inhabitants. That is almost 90% of those municipalities. Now, the objective, to neutrality 2050, well, we already in France we do have the decarbonated electricity, 80% decarbonated electricity. No topic is not to decarbonate more electricity, but it is to have more usage of electricity and to produce more and to use it in different multiple usages while having sobriety. So when we see at rural urban, what do we see? That first of all, this ecological transition somehow it is an opportunity for the rural territories because the urban territories depend on the countryside. They consume the urban territories 20 times more electricity than they produce, actually. 2/3 of renewable energy, sun, power, wind farms, biomass, small dams, biomass, 2/3 are produced in France in municipalities of less than 2,000 inhabitants. All this is growing at an amazing pace. So, at Enedis, we know that Enedis, because we connect these renewable energy to the grid, and we did time 2 in volume and numbers of connection between 2022 and 2020. Today, you talked about decentralization. Just one figure: 700,000 renewable electricity production sites all over France, and 2/3 in rural, and we had to add 1 million new production sites to be connected between now and 2030. Sorry. So this evolution is it's an opportunity for the rural area. More innovation. Buildings. Get together to produce and consume part of their production. Well, it does happen as well in the rural areas, in the Morbihan, in the Brittany, in the center of France, on the west. Those are additional sources of incomes for the farmers. Now, second point I'd like to insist on is it was said, feeling of abandonment, roles, no access to public services, no education, healthcare. But that's not true when it comes to electricity. Marie-Ange said transport is the right of the right. I would say electricity is the good of the goods. That's the one that makes it possible to heat to cook, to study, to have light on every aspect of your daily life. So when you look at the French organization, the good news is that, this access is guaranteed everywhere for everybody, whatever the weather. There are storms in the southwest. We have customers around Pau in the Pyrenees, in the land, who've lost their power supply because power lines, trees fell on power lines. Well, we, Enedis right now is sending reinforcement task force. We have a rapid task force. Your employees will come from all over France to make sure that our customers will be again served, connected to the grid rapidly in the zone. Second good news is that clients in Aix-en-Provence will pay the same price to have access to this electricity than the client in the Creuse in the center of France, where there are 9 times less clients in the Creuse, not to mention Lozère, where there is one client every 18 kilometers of a network or grid. So, you know, we have to invest permanently to you know, this network, it goes 35 times around the world, you know, in terms of length, you know, and largest in Europe, you know, and all the project holders for renewable electricity. If you drive an electrical car, if you want electrical heat pump, well, you got exactly the same technical conditions, then of price, condition of connection, in anywhere in France. So, and this is thanks to Ninki, which has been installed today in 95% of the household. So we're not in Texas, you know. In Texas, grids are not interconnected, so you know you have to deal with what you have in your territory. In terms of energy transition, the topic is not self-sufficiency. It doesn't make sense for electrons that would travel, but it is the collective solidarity to be inclusive and to be inclusive through education, vocational training, you know, the social, you know, the education of working class people. So this should be accessible to everybody at the best cost, which means the best price, which means a lot of investment. And I think we have to insist on that. So lots of hope to see how this ecological transition takes place first in the rural territories. Thank you, Marianne. So the right of the right, goods of the goods for electricity, and what's the importance of pooling and public services. So how does it take place in Indonesia? Queen Mumpuni, I mean, you come from a country which has 17,000 islands. 900 of them are being inhabited in the country or in remote areas. Goods of the goods, is it also electricity? You work in a company which creates micro dams. They do electricity. So how did you do it and how does it work?
Thank you. Merci. Well, for me, poverty is a symptom. The real problem because of local community are being disconnected to their own local resources. That's why what we do is to reconnect. How we reconnect the local resources with the local community is by building a microhydro. Microhydro is a very small electricity generation from the water that utilizing the water that flow in the river. And in Indonesia, we have so many abundant, you know, those kind of resources. We have two approaches. The first approach is we are building that with the local community and off-grid. It's not connected to the national grid. We create a cooperative utilizing this electricity to develop the local economic, such as making patchouli oil, lemongrass oil, drying the coffee, and all agriculture productivity so that the community has the income and they can leverage their social welfare and also the economic condition. This is the first. The second one is the electricity is connected to the grid. Because connected to the grid, so the cooperative has what we call streaming income or monthly income. The money flows from the national grid to the local community, and based on the consensus that are having a meeting in the village, they are utilizing the money for giving scholarship to the poor community, the family who cannot afford the kids going to school. So this money is plugging to use that to support the kids from the very low income family. The second is to give a subsidy for the pregnant woman so that they can have a very healthy baby. It's for also building the irrigation channel and everything that actually based on the meeting, what are the money is going to use. The very interesting for us is that we're receiving many students. Franks, contribute with from Grenoble University. They have many technical students who are coming and really witnessing, working together with the local community so they know how is actually to linkage between urban and rural. If in the rural area you can find a good school, good health facilities, good job, they're not going to go to the city. That's why we are promoting this as an entry point to develop economy in the village. So people are willing to stay in the village with a very good environment, but they have a very good income. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Tri Mumpuni. And thank you to all of our speakers for the diversity of your different approaches and solutions. I would like just to get you to react to the importance of public policies. You're all private players or public players, but all of that can only become consistent if we have the right public policies, if we have the right politicians who take into account these new challenges for new developments. Who would like to start? Perhaps Marie-Ange Debon? Yes, that is a question that is very important for an operator like Enedis. You will understand that our activity is long-term. We have a vision for our investments taking us through to 2040. We've published a path that we want to follow. We want to reach 100 billion euros. So when we invest €1 in renewable energy in the world, you have to invest also €1 in the network that's going to, the distribution network that makes it possible to connect the renewable energy. So we do a lot of planning. However, I think that globally we can do things better. We can do things better in France, and the recent law on the acceleration of the use of renewable energies reflects this. How can we better anticipate developments? How can we better earmark things? There are areas of the distribution network where there are potential opportunities where we can lower costs. And coming back to sobriety, today Enedis is connecting a lot of charging stations for electric vehicles. So you can have very fast charging stations, slower charging stations. It depends whether you're charging at home or you want quick charging in a service station. So Enedis is able to do this on all supermarket car parks, for example. If you go to a fast food place in a mall, for example, you can charge your car, thanks to Enedis. And so we've got a service station on each car park. We do it with a lot of pleasure because it means contributing to the environmental transition. But where is the global vision? What is the consistent vision when it comes to locating these charging stations? We're talking about rare materials, we're talking about water, we're talking about investing public money and income from customers and taxpayers. So the effort to be sober with resources, with our finite resources, that's obliging us not to work from top to bottom, but locally. There's a reconciliation and there's a lot of anticipation. We need to better plan and better anticipate with our investments so that we've got the best possible investments in the next for the next 30 to 40 years. So would you like to react to that?
With you, Moyan. We need to have a government that are consistent, putting the regulation and law enforcement to use a lot of renewable energy, that actually the resources are scattered everywhere. And Indonesian context, I prefer to call that we are an archipelago. So small is beautiful, island-based. They are really independent, have a very smart grid, not a continent like Europe, This is very important, how to make sure that the government is pro-renewable energy and also pro-a community-based development, meaning give space to the local community to be able to have their own local resources by utilizing their own local resources for their own local community. This is the first one. The second one, political issue. Yes, politicians play a very important role. We want to make sure that politically renewable energy is become a favor of every human being. And this is not easy because we understand that coal and all fossil fuel are still belongs to the oligarch. That's why we need to have a strong policy pushed by the politician on renewable energy. Thank you.
Merci, Tri Mumpuni.
Thank you, Tri Mumpuni. So, would you like to react, Shidong? When we look at China, for example, with the Yuku, with the migrant workers, with their residency permits, they don't have the same rights as urban dwellers. So, how are things moving today in China with respect to these questions? So the Chinese government wants to solve this problem. We have a program for reducing poverty, for example. So this program that we have, personally, I'm supporting 2 families, for example. In my hometown, I talk with these families. I try and understand their needs. So there is economic support that is important, but it's also important to solve other problems. So, for example, traffic. Is it possible to find doctors to treat disease? That's what they ask me. So this is the kind of thing that I help the families with. They trust me. They trust me to find a doctor for them, for example. Also for their children, I can provide help with their children. For example, they might want to have a better school or better education for their children. So schools have restrictions. There are limits in terms of admission of pupils. So for them, schools might not be accessible. So this program for reducing poverty is very important, and it consists in increasing the revenue of the population. And there are 2 phases. First of all, it's important to reduce basic life problems. Secondly, it's important to have basic services. For example, it's important to reduce housing problems. So there we are. If we can get to grips with all of these problems, we can move communities out of poverty. There's also a collective structure focusing on reducing the gap between urban life and rural life. So, for example, in Shanghai, if we want to go to Peking, there's a high-speed train connection. But if you leave from Huineng, for the same journey in terms of kilometers, it takes 11 hours to reach the destination. If farmers want to sell their vegetables and need to take the train to go to a big city, it's very complicated for them. So you said that this roundtable would be a race against time. We've just got a few minutes for questions in the audience. There is a microphone going round. Any questions in the audience? No questions. Well, I have a question on my tablet. How can we reduce the gap between urban and rural dwellers? You've talked about this. What about in terms of public transport, fiber, optical, trade, water, energy? Let's go back to the question of water. Does somebody want to react? Or road infrastructures mainly? Marie-Ange Debon. is there anything we can do? And how are we going about things? How are we planning things? Yes, you asked about public policies earlier on. In fact, we all think that we need decisions to be local because regions are really quite different and the problems are also quite different. So public policies, obviously there needs to be a common base, but there also needs to be a certain amount of freedom for regions to organize things in the way they wish to organize things. Local authorities today don't have much freedom in terms of their revenue. Public transport, for example, it's very important that the supply be in line with demand. So some can increase their supply, but they're also obliged nationally to stick to certain things in terms of revenue. So public policies are determining for financing, for standards, they're determining for regulations, and the training sector. If we take the training sector, for example, the transport sector, like any other sector, it's experiencing a lot of tension. So what about training public policies? They haven't always focused their efforts on the right subjects. There's a focus on scientific subjects, but mobility is not there in training programs. So all of these regulatory aspects are determining factors. If we want to have a reconciliation between urban and rural issues, it's not just financing. We need to have a regulatory framework so that things are more local when it comes to decisions being made. Thank you, Marie-Ange Debon. Maya Bakash, perhaps you would like to conclude? Well, let me just go back to the question about infrastructures. There's another essential infrastructure that we didn't talk about, telecom and internet networks. Today, they really are at the heart of the matter when it comes to regional issues. We can't have people working from home if there's no access to communication structures, especially with fiber-based networks and mobile networks. So public policies have been determining in this sector. For fiber connections, the private market went to profitable areas first and foremost, places where there was a dense population. We had to have the France Très Haut Débit public policy to force them to go to areas where the market was not immediately profitable. So when it comes to infrastructures, you know, economists agree with this. For infrastructures, the role of the state is essential. So if I were to conclude now with respect to what we've heard, there are two words that are important, according to me. The first is sustainable. You've all talked about the energy transition, the environmental transition, and I think there's a whole range of questions and decisions to be taken. You know, taking decisions is not that easy. There are political choices to be made, yes, between dense cities where you have where you're less than 50 minutes away from everything. We love that, you know, being able to access services and shops very easily. But at the same time, and there are things to be done in this area, people want to go out into the countryside and feel the quiet. So what do we do in the future in terms of public policies? There are life communities that are very integrated. Is that what we want to continue? Or do we want further away spaces with a lot of mobility, a lot of public transport? I don't think that we've decided what we want. And perhaps us as citizens, we don't really know what we want. We can't do everything, obviously. I don't see how we could possibly do everything. So coming back to transition, we need to renew the debate about urban inequalities. It's not just about, you know, some people are consuming, others are producing. Inequalities are going to be unsettled. Contributions are going to be different. You know, this is what we have to tackle in the future. The second word that I would like to share on top of sustainability is the word integration. You practically all use the word integration. So it's not just about reconciling urban and rural matters. It's about rebuilding a community. We've just come out, well, we're in a very conflictual era, and to succeed with our transition, we need integration. We need to work together. We need to reform a community and reshare needs. We need to look at inequalities of access to services, to mobility. So we've got to look at redistribution. Thank you to all of our speakers. So hope is the leitmotif of our meeting in Aix. And I think we can hope, listening to what you've said. So Shidong will be dedicating, signing his book today at the Fnac shop. So if you want to go and pick up his book at the Fnac. Thank you very much.